I have no idea what drove Kuro Games to give this character for free, but I'm glad that they did, because if it wasn't free, there is a high chance that I would have spent my precious astrites to pull for him, because Gauntlet main DPS have a special place in my heart. Xiangli is a character that specializes in unleashing strong combos during his Resonance Liberation window, and what makes him special or different from other liberation focused characters like Jian, Calcharo, and Ling Yang is his unusually long Resonance Liberation duration. This generous window allows you to dodge, perform quick swaps or swap cancels, and even gives room for a few mistakes that you might make, making his gameplay a bit more forgiving. Additionally, Xiangli gains interruption resistance while his Resonance Liberation is active, eliminating one of the most frustrating issues faced by many other DPS characters at S0 like Calcharo, reducing his reliance on swap cancels or quick swaps, which is not that difficult to do, but it may be challenging for the average player who just wants to chill and have a relaxing moment with the game. And when in his liberation, his forte also becomes very good at dealing AoE damage or area of effect, and has a small pulling effect that can group enemies for you. Oh, and did I already mention that he's free? But like every S0 character in Wuthering Waves, Xiangli has some cons or disadvantages as well, such as being tied to his Resonance Liberation. So overworld exploration can be a bit annoying since the enemies die way too quickly while your liberation is active. His forte makes you get stuck in the last plunge attack animation, increasing your vulnerability to damage during that animation. Playing hypercarry teams demand a careful setup, or buffs will run out quickly due to insufficient resonance energy acquisition in the second rotation. Law of Rains makes enemies get stuck in a time freeze, which acts as a double-edged sword, because while it can help you reposition to avoid taking damage, it can also affect the rhythm of combat, especially when up against hologram bosses like Crownless. As I do with all of my character guides, I will not only break down his kit for you to understand his playstyle, but also provide solutions to the aforementioned cons or disadvantages that I mentioned earlier to the best of my abilities, so that you can optimize his gameplay and enjoy him as much as you want. These kinds of videos take me a long time to make, so show some love by liking this video and subscribing to help support the channel. With that said, let's get into the video. We'll be covering 5 main sections in this video, which I will include timestamps for you to navigate to your preferred section, including how to build forte stacks called capacity when not in his liberation very quickly, breakdown of his forte in and out of his liberation, and how to solve its related issues, team building, which echoes are best suited for him in different scenarios, and lastly, best weapons to use for every player regardless of the size of your wallet. First, let's take a look at how to generate his forte stacks very quickly. When not in his liberation, his normal skill called deduction outside of his forte and the enhanced forte skill called decipher share different cooldowns, so the most efficient way to recover forte stacks very quickly is just to use his skill as soon as it's made available to you. This means that even if your normal skill is on cooldown and your forte gets full, your forte skill will be available to you. The normal skill cast is a fast slash attack which does not leave you vulnerable to damage with a decent scaling, so spamming it whenever you have it is a great way to recover resonance energy and forte stacks at the same time. Now let's move on to his forte. His forte is a special resonance skill that can be used in 2 different states, which is outside of his liberation and during his liberation. When not in his liberation, if you press his skill while your forte stacks called capacity is full, Xiangli will leap into the air and perform a diagonal slash, which has a ridiculous auto-targeting feature that can even chase airborne enemies. After the diagonal slash, if you press your basic attack button, he will perform a series of consecutive attacks in the air and end it with a plunge attack known as revamp. But this brings up an issue where he becomes vulnerable during the revamp attack, because you cannot cancel out of it by dashing when it's initiated by pressing your basic attack button after the diagonal slash. There are 4 ways to fix this. Right after pressing his forte skill outside of his liberation, you can decide to dash in midair to avoid incoming damage, but this will prevent you from using the revamp attack, which will lead to a loss in his personal damage. The second way to fix this is to finish the revamp attack by tanking the incoming damage, because you have resistance to interruption even if you are not in his liberation. And then shortly after he finishes the revamp attack with a plunge, press his normal skill, which can let you cancel the plunge attack fairly quickly. Keep in mind that that there is still a bit of delay between the plunge and the skill activation, so do be careful when doing this. What I suggest you do is to dash as soon as his normal skill animation begins if there is an incoming damage. However, if the normal skill is not available to you and you're stuck in the plunge animation while there's an incoming attack, then you have to go for the third option. The third option is fairly simple. All you need to do is swap to another character as soon as he starts the revamp attack animation, and he'll complete the attack sequence with the final plunge even when the swap character is on the field. However, this can lead to some complications, especially if you suck at dodging in midair with the on-field character. So if you have a healer in your team like Verena or a shielder like Zhengzhen, focus on tanking the damage, because as I said earlier, you have full interruption to resistance, and as soon as you see him plunge, swap to another character to prevent him from taking consecutive attacks, where you can use the on-field character to dodge the incoming attack. The fourth method is for sweaty players like me who plays the game as if Wuthering Waves will reward you with astrites by maxing out on skill points. It also works well if you're playing solo, since the second and third methods depend on playing with at least one character in your team. It involves pressing your jump button as soon as you hear the sound effect of his revamp plunge attack, which will make him roll over, and when the roll animation begins, you can literally do anything you want, like dashing to avoid incoming damage or attacking the enemy. I actually covered this in my Kalcharo video, and the comments I got were wild because it can be a bit difficult to do, especially in the heat of battle where you're just trying to survive. But I'm okay as long as a few people can implement this solution to help them enjoy the characters that they love to play with. Now let's move on to his forte in his Resonance Liberation. The stacks that you need in order to use his forte are now called Performance Capacity, which you can gain by using his basic attacks, Resonance Skill, which is now called Divergence, his Revamp Midair Attack, and his Dodge Counter. When his forte stacks are full, you can then use your skill to detonate Hypercubes, which will be floating around him when you activate his Liberation. While trying to build up Performance Capacity to unleash your forte skill, you are always incentivized to use his Divergence skill, which will give you 2 stacks, and then press your basic attacks to perform the Midair Revamp Attack, which will also give you 3 stacks to fully fill his forte gauge. And the reason is as follows. Your Liberation and the Hypercube Explosion from the forte skill freezes the enemy, so it makes it somewhat safe to use your Divergence skill and the Revamp Attack so that you don't take that much damage. The game also does not tell you that even if your Divergence skill does not do any damage, or even if you miss, you will still gain the 2 Performance Capacity stacks, as you can see in this clip. It's also the quickest way to fill your forte gauge. Using the Divergence skill helps recover a decent amount of resonance energy, which is good for energy recovery. However, the Divergence skill has a 7 seconds cooldown, and by the time that your Law of Rain's Cube Explosion animation is complete, the Divergence cooldown will be at 3 seconds, which has a very good synergy with the full sequence of his basic attacks, because it takes 3 seconds to regenerate all the 5 Performance Capacity stacks with his basic attacks. This means that you can use his Divergence skill combined with the Revamp Midair attacks only twice to gain the full Performance Capacity stacks to detonate the first and the last Hypercubes, which is quite unfortunate because if the total cooldown was about 4 seconds, you could skip the basic attacks and always use your Divergence skill for generating stacks as a hyper carry at S0, which can make him deal more damage because of the decent Divergence scaling and better energy recovery. At S0, if you want to only use his Divergence skill and Revamp to generate the full stacks, then your only option is to play quick swap teams where your other DPS or sub DPS can fill in during the Divergence skill cooldown. Now let's move on to team building. You can either build a hyper carry or a quick swap team. I tested both against Morning Aches in the tower and there was no significant difference between the clear times. Keep in mind that I don't have a signature weapon yet. The hyper carry rotation is not that different from the one that I talked about in my previous Zhengzhen guide, but I'll go over it briefly. You just need to start with Zhengzhen's Liberation and her skill. Then switch to Verena and complete her basic attack sequence to gain 1 stack. Cast her skill, Echo, and jump to do basic attacks to consume the stacks, which should give you a full concerto energy, and then swap to Zhengzhen to complete her basic attack sequence. If done correctly, Zhengzhen's forte bar should be full, and then start her Zutian progress by holding the basic attack button. You can dodge when there's an incoming attack which fills a decent amount of her concerto energy, and then swap to Xiangli Yao. It shouldn't take you more than 18 seconds to set up this rotation, but if Zheng Xin had the Makato weapon, it could have been a much faster rotation. The problem with this team is the resonance energy requirements for Xiangli Yao in the subsequent rotations. You can easily solve this problem if you were lucky enough to get energy region substats of about 30% on your echoes, leading to a total of 130 energy region. You can also solve his energy issues by using a character like Yinlin, who can use her skill 2 times every rotation, which can help Xiangli Yao generate about 50% of what Yinlin gets while she's on the field. I don't have Yinlin, so I cannot provide a detailed showcase of this team, but check out Morment Hypercube opener after this video for a detailed rotation using Yinlin, Xiangli Yao, and Verena, which I'll leave in the description. For his quick swap teams, I tested him with Zheji, who was running a full set Freezing Frost. To play a quick swap or swap cancel team efficiently, what you need to do is swap in your other DPS character during Xiangli Yao's time freeze, which happens whenever you use your liberation and when you detonate a hypercube using his Forte skill in his liberation. So whenever Xiangli Yao starts the Law of Rain's Forte skill cast, that will be your cue to swap in another character to do damage, because your character will be somewhat safe to dish out damage because of the time freeze. For Xiangli Yao and Zheji teams, what I like to do is to leave her imprint on the ground and then swap her in during each hypercube detonation to press her skill and teleport to one of them to do damage, and then swap back to Xiangli Yao to use his divergence skill or basic attack to detonate another hypercube, and then the whole process starts all over again. Using quick swap is the quickest way to recover energy due to multiple skill casts by other characters in your team and deal more damage, especially if you have not hyper invested in your Xiangli Yao because of limited resources, but you have other fully invested sub DPS or DPS characters, and it's so much fun to play than a hyper carry team. Now let's talk about his best Echo Sonata effects. Void Thunder will be your go-to set if you want to play quick swap teams, but it requires you to do a heavy attack and a resonance skill cast, which is not that difficult to do because you can always cancel his heavy attack with his skill and it will still trigger the activation requirement, so whether it's clunky or not depends on your skill level in the game. If you're much more interested in hypercarry teams, then Lingering Tunes will be your best in slot because it's relatively easy to use, and the best part about it is that Mech Abomination deals electro damage, so you will deal more damage overall because of its matching element with Xiangli Yao due to the electro damage bonus 3 cost that you will have among your echo sets. It's also worth mentioning that Lingering Tunes allows characters who possess inherent skills that allows them to gain elemental damage bonus deal significantly higher damage than the elemental damage bonus Sonata effects because of how damage is calculated in Wuthering Waves. This demands its own separate video, but to go over it briefly, skill hit here represents your character's total attack multiplied by the type of attack's multiplier and that particular attack's skill scaling bonus if it has any available, like how Ling Yang gains a 150% skill bonus to his Mountain Roma when you unlock his second inherent skill called Diligent Practice. If you look at this equation closely, you can see that increasing your character's attack increases skill hits significantly, which increases the entire equation's output. And since elemental damage bonus is additive to skill damage bonus, which refers to stats like liberation damage bonus and resonance skill damage bonus, its value becomes very less significant if you have high liberation damage bonus, especially if you have Xiangli Yao's weapon, which gives you huge resonance liberation damage bonus. This means that stacking up more electro damage bonus will have diminishing returns if his liberation damage bonus is already high from his substats and his weapon. So as long as you're playing a hypercarry team and you have his weapon, Lingering Tunes will be your best echo set because of the 35% attack you gain while you are on the field, which increases the entire damage output based on this equation, which is better than having 40% electro damage bonus from Void Thunder. I'll make a separate video explaining how you can properly build your characters and deal more damage based on these damage equations. For his weapon options, his signature weapon is a huge upgrade, so make that your first priority before going for any of his sequences. You can use the Abyss Surges or the Stoneheart Battle Pass weapons, but you will need to hyper invest in getting good substats like Resonance Liberation damage bonus, crit rate, and crit damage on all your echoes to see some really big numbers. That'll be all for my Xiangli breakdown, and let me know if I missed anything in the comments section. See you guys in the next one. Bye bye.
So please whatever.